When we start painting a new army, those first units that we paint are in an odd place. The first model we complete, until it's part of a completed squad, occupies this bizarre state where the model is basically useless in the game of Warhammer 40,000, despite the fact that the model is complete. It's not like you can play a game of Warhammer 40,000 with just one model, although it would probably be quite funny to see somebody try. Despite the fact that you have succeeded to paint an entire model, your reward is delayed, so you invest a few dozen hours of time painting and you've got yourself your first squad. But still, you can't play a game with just one squad. This is not Kill Team or Necromunda. It needs another squad backing it up. Sink a dozen more hours and those two squads combined are still basically incomplete until they have a HQ guy to back them up. Weeks in, and providing everything has gone to plan so far, at long last the reward for our efforts yields us a stub of a detachment at under 500 points. Already you're sick and tired of looking at infantry, but you still got 80 of them to organise, demold, assemble, prime, and then only does the painting truly begin. And you thought grinding and fetch quests were only in computer games. What if we ditched the waves and waves of infantry and only had to paint 3 larger models, or 5 and not say 25? Wouldn't it be nice to put a bit more time and attention into a few larger models? And would it actually get us to 1,000 points faster than painting swathes of infantry? Boasting what are arguably the most impressive kits in 40k, Chaos Knights are characterful and can dominate the field all on their own. Due to their points cost, they don't need to be fielded in huge numbers to perform well on the tabletop. Only having to finish 3 medium-sized models is nice and easy, as you can take time to personalise each one. And if you don't want to spend time converting them to Chaos, then paint them in an ever so slightly less heavy metal looking scheme and call them Renegades instead. You also have the added bonus of being able to run your army from the Imperial Knights or Chaos Knights list when occupying this grey area. To me, the most important part of the hobby is having a fully painted army and playing games. The quicker I can get there, the better. Just having to add a HQ choice to an army presents an annoying challenge to beginners and veterans alike. Almost every HQ choice in 40k is much more awkward to paint than the rest of their respective army. The more complicated the paint job is, the more that can potentially go wrong. The Warlord in a detachment of Chaos Knights tend not to be plagued by fiddly details. Most armies denote their leader by giving them some purity seals or a robe that's going to be scorched beyond recognition after about 2 seconds in combat. It's either that or an overly large haircut, which will not likely stand up to a melter blast. With Chaos Knights, you denote your Warlord by adding more plasteel and adamantium to your army. I will gladly paint engines and armour, they serve a practical purpose in slaughtering the enemy. Obsidious Malex looks like a Weatherspoons regular attempting to walk up a hill, and yet his points cost is nearly as much as a whole armiger, a towering war machine with an absurd move distance and 12 wounds that can snipe enemy vehicles from 60 inches away. That is, unless they drastically alter the points cost in their new codex. Knights can be a truly refreshing change to long-time hobbyists, as fielding a Knight House does not require you to paint potentially hundreds of models. The only drawback to larger models is that they need more cover, but with the vast amounts of box sets released by Games Workshop over the past few years, you could say that we've got it covered. Another issue you might encounter when starting a new army is that the first models painted in a force tend to look a little bit more basic, as your approach to the paint scheme is yet to be refined at that point. You tend to notice that the first models you've completed don't look as good as the ones you painted later on in the build, but models that stand out in any way can break up the otherwise tightly cohesive appearance of Space Marines and other armies that follow tightly defined paint schemes. Having to fix them is more time, with results not guaranteed to match the rest of the force after you've invested the effort. Chaos Knights and Renegades don't suffer from this problem. As they are more individual, they may have more individualistic backstories. It doesn't really matter if you can't paint that well. Your colour scheme doesn't even have to be perfectly matched throughout your army. If you get bored of painting one scheme, why not try another? I painted my first armiger about 6 months back. I like the paint job, but I thought the close combat variants could use just a little more cornate zazz. So I made the red look a little bloodier, and I made the metallics a bit more edgy. I can do this in a Renegade or Chaos Knight house, because bands of Renegade Knights can often be made up of members who came from lots of different Knight houses. Single armigers might even go Renegade just by themselves. retaining characteristics from their previous masters, with armor quickly repainted to denote allegiance to new masters, whether Renegade or Chaos. Having your first armature stand out a bit and look slightly different can be easily explained away with fluff, as Chaos and Renegade Knights shirk the rigid social and organisational norms of Loyalist Knight houses. You could almost imagine Renegade or Chaos Knights like a biker gang, with new members not allowed to wear banners or full patches until initiated, and not allowed to wear the personal colours of founders or veterans. This explains why your first few models looked a bit different when you were finding a colour scheme that actually works for you. They are recently turned Chaos Knights, exposed to frontline actions, there to prove themselves to their new Dark Masters. And with this extra fluffy excuse, we don't have to paint sprawling custom designs onto our knights every single time we want to expand our force a little bit. Neither do we have to apply reams and reams of transfers, which take a deceptive amount of time on top of completing the paint job. While Chaos and Renegade Knights offer an easy way into the hobby, Loyalist Knights present a bit more of a challenge. After all, a Loyalist Knight without painted banners and 25 waterslide transfers is a knight that is totally incomplete. A Chaos or Renegade Knight doesn't need any of that stuff from the get-go. They're too busy killing things to spend all day polishing their chassis, or giving each other badges to prove that they did their job. The bright heraldic colour schemes of Loyalist Knights are more complex than, say, painting something in the colours of Nurgle or Khorne. Complex colour schemes take a deceptive amount of time to complete. The more complex a colour scheme is, the more likely you are to get bored and give up, leaving tragic scenes of half-painted miniatures in our wake. The vast majority of people do this. All one needs to do is search Warhammer 40,000 on eBay. You will be confronted by the grim, sprawling truth that most people aren't really that good at painting, and that we collectively lack the motivation to actually get anything done. I'm not saying this is a bad thing, it just simply is. And I'm not saying this with some chip on my shoulder. I have no delusions of winning Golden Demon, I'm not the best painter guy by any stretch of the imagination, and I know I'll probably never be anything above average. All I want are models that are relatively neatly painted and can murder the other guy's models on a tabletop, in a relaxed setting. But when you have zero experience painting these models, you have a steep learning curve ahead of you, and before you can get your army where you want it to be, what you do not need in that situation is a colour scheme that, while looking simple, is actually full of awkward steps that require you to be absurdly careful at all times in fear of ruining the entire model. Space Marine helmet colour variations are pretty bad for this. Being the most popular side in 40k, you would have thought they'd have made Space Marines a bit more simple to paint. Gravis armoured Tick Boys might have 3 wounds, but they are still a hassle when it comes to painting them. Try painting their head without getting paint all over their inner armour bits. Well, at the very least, it's hard to go wrong when actually buying a knight. And whilst having little to choose from may sound like a bad thing, if you're new to the hobby and walk into your local store, it's easy to pick up a shiny new box of miniatures, only to realise later that it's basically useless in game. As many armies, especially Space Marines, have a vast amount of different but similar looking units, it's hard to make a poor choice with Chaos Knights though, as there's only a few models in the range, and they can each hold their own on the battlefield. A complaint I have about painting Chaos or Loyalists is that the trim is somewhat of an annoyance, and while the trim is present on Knights, it's nowhere near as fiddly as painting it on smaller models. And when painted in subassembly, it's surprisingly easy and fun to paint. It's nice building a big engine of war, bit by bit, and it's rewarding to lavish lots of attention on a few models, gaining quick gratification for painting large but simple models, plus you get an army out of it. Only a madman tries to totally convert every model in their army, but when you're only taking 3 armigers and 2 knights into battle, you only have to convert 5 models, plus they don't all have to look identical. If you want to convert every model in your army, then you can proudly proclaim that every model in your army is indeed converted, and that alone is worth about 5 billion hipster points. When it comes to painting our engines, Chaos generally looks good painted dark and dirty. These schemes are much easier to achieve for an amateur with dangerous levels of enthusiasm, and a big old pot of Nuln Oil. With the right approach and the right army to suit our somewhat middling commitment to the hobby, we can slap some paint on our knights, spray them with a coat of varnish, and call it a day for now. Apply some transfers and kill markings when they've earned them. For now, you can relax, as your gargantuan bipedal killing machines wipe the board clean of anybody who dares to oppose us. And all the while, Their foot sloggers took way longer to paint than our knights. Isn't that just slightly funny? Too long, don't read. Chaos Knights are amongst the simplest and most rewarding armies in 40k. Whether you batch paint an army in one go, or whether you individually convert and paint each one, cherishing each detail, they can provide an easy way into the hobby for the average Joe, who doesn't have heaps of time going spare. And that's why Chaos Knights are the best army in 40k. This is Dave from Warp Song Games. I hope you like this new format of short video. If you do, then please sacrifice the like button to the ruinous powers, and subscribe to this channel for more 40k content.